Hi, this is Donovan, and I'm guiding you through a practice tonight. This is our guided practice, building on the chapter I'm completing, part 2, chapter 3, which was an exploration of the arts as sacrament. And the first part of that was about music, the last part of that was about theater, and tonight we're exploring a guided meditation on the Stations of the Cross, the Way of Sorrows. As we share this practice together tonight, I actually invite you to resist the mindset of colonizers and empire, the way that Helena, Constantine, and American evangelicals Christendom, where land grabbing, wealth hoarding, Eurocentrism, and white supremacy in a particular way of using the Bible and Jesus are weaponized to divide and conquer all but a few. That's where I ended, introducing this practice in the last video, the last episode. So I want to make sure that I'm saying, yes, that's a way of practicing this, but I'm inviting you tonight to practice this meditation through the revolutionary lens of theater of the oppressed, which is the way of Francis. It's the way of life that Francis lived. He's the one that pioneered this practice. And I believe that that's what he was inviting us to, this theater of the oppressed kind of approach, as he understood this practice and introduced it. Now, in the manuscript of this book, at the back, there's appendices of all these guided practices that we've been doing so far. So I'm going to begin actually with sharing with you some instructions for practicing this, or suggestions. They're written. Everything is a suggestion that I'm sharing. When I've done this, I've actually done this practice many different times in many different settings with a lot of different folks. Usually peace churches, sometimes overtly queer practices. There's a Huffington Post companion piece to this that guides you through it in a queer way. But my suggestions for ecumenical practice in any setting, and ecumenical just means the household of faith. So it could be in any setting at all. Yeah, I would suggest, and what we've found meaningful in other groups when I've guided this, is to have candles, a way to light those candles, meaningful sacred texts. You may want to have Christian scriptures handy, where those intersect with some of these meditations and draw from gospel stories to meditate. Don't have to have any of those things. I have a candle of my own lit in the background here that I'm using for myself as we do this practice together. And usually we open the practice with an opening prayer. So I'm going to share a prayer that I've used with other folks. This is in a Christian tradition, but it is meant to be a wide open prayer, no particular branch of Christianity. Let us take time and put aside our daily cares. Let us quiet our hearts and join with all who pray. God, I go from place to place. I rush from here to there. Today, let me go with you. Let me be a part of your journey, that I might start to understand your great love for all people, including me, and reflect that love to everyone around me, all creatures. Let me learn strength in adversity and be a foundation for others around me, and with your strength. Let me discover the joy of new life and carry it each day in my heart. Take me with you, God. Let me journey with you today. And usually when we practice this, we would only do one station at a time, or maybe we'd be able to do a couple a week during the Lenten season. Praying it on your own, and the way we're going to do it tonight, you just take time and quietly go through the whole path. So I'll start with station 1. Jesus is unjustly condemned. The complex story of Jesus' trial and condemnation told in the Gospels of Mark, Luke, and John can evoke painful memories for many of us, including those colonized and those excluded from our families and shared faith practices. I have to pause here. This is very real. I'm filming this in the room that I rent, and around me you might hear children. I assure you they are playing. These are neighbor children that are just they live right next to us, and they're just very, very playful, very, very young children with a lot of energy, and they've been confined for many, many months during the pandemic. So actually, I'm going to circle back to what we were just doing, but that's part of it. Life is part of a meditation. I was sharing with you yesterday. Meditation isn't to help us escape life; it's to help us embrace and fit us for life. So I'm not trying to drown out those little kids and dogs. What I'm doing with you right now is I'm sharing the meditation with you. That's what we normally do, and then we usually spend some time in silent prayer after we do the meditation. So for each station, I'm going to finish it with a time of prayer where you can journal if you want to. You can quietly reflect. You can light a candle. Whatever's meaningful to you to do in that quiet time. So I'll go back to the reading. Again, we're talking about Jesus' trial. He's unjustly condemned. And there's many people who likely can relate to Jesus in this way. Those colonized, those excluded from our families and shared faith practices. Religious community leaders gather, just like they did in this story, without us present, like they did without Jesus present, and they decide they'll no longer include someone that's been part of the community, but instead will deliver them to whatever outside authority might decide our fate, a court. Here, when I share this with people who are recovering from being cast out of Christian community because they're LGBTQIA, I bring up the idea of a lot of times our fate is decided. We'll be shut out of our religious community and told that the courts will decide whether our marriages are going to be recognized or whether we can have a job somewhere or not. But we're shut out of practicing those things in our community. So our marriages, our ministries, our careers in our religious communities may no longer be recognized, and that's something that instead of taking responsibility for, that religious leaders sometimes decide, well, I wash my hands of that, let the court decide. And that obviously Jesus is going through something far more serious than that. I'm just saying, as we're walking this path with Jesus, there may be different ways where your path might intersect with Jesus here. Those we trusted as our spiritual community now withdraw from us, just like the Sanhedrin, who were Jewish leaders in a sense, Jewish elders. They withdrew from Jesus. They withdrew their protection from Jesus. So those we trusted as our spiritual community withdraw from us, avoiding us that they might not be defiled. And those are the words from Mark and John. They didn't want to have association with Jesus because they thought it would make them look bad or make them unclean in God's sight. Likewise, when asked what the accusation is, religious leaders still often spout this same kind of circular reasoning without any specific charge. We can't punish this person, nor can we explain any specific way they violate our religious laws. But if they weren't evildoers, and that's the word used here that the Sanhedrin uses for Jesus, if they weren't evildoers, we wouldn't have excluded them. So it becomes a circular argument about, well, since we're punishing them, they must have done something wrong. But we're not sure what it is, but God wouldn't let us punish them, I suppose, unless they must have done something wrong. This is in John 18. So here we can meditate on Jesus' long-suffering, self-respecting silence as he's being judged and accused, refusing to dignify his groundless accusers with a response until just the right moment. In his own time, on his own terms, he finally explains that whatever power human authorities have to inflict suffering may be given by God, not earned by human righteousness. And when humans use that power to persecute the innocent, it's those who judge and exclude, not those who are condemned, who sin. That's in John 19, Jesus' words. The trial ends with the confused, conflicted political leader, Pilate, repeatedly affirming the innocence of the accused, Jesus in this case, but bowing to the incomprehensible prejudices of a religious mob out of fear. Many of us may relate to that. No justice for Jesus. A very contemporary, very queer situation. Station 2, Jesus takes his cross. I'd invite you between these stations, if you'd like to take longer to meditate, please just, hit pause. Station 2, Jesus takes his cross. Traditionally, when we pray this station, we consider Pilate showing Jesus to the crowd. Ecce homo in Latin means behold the man. Asking again what evil the righteous man Jesus, in whom he found no cause meriting punishment, had done. Again, no specific accusation, just a cry for punishment resounds from the crowd. And that can be found in Matthew 27, John 18, Luke 23. In the most ancient accounts, a bystander, Simon the Cyrene, is forced by Roman soldiers to carry Jesus' horizontal crosspiece right from this beginning of the walk all the way to the crucifixion site, where the vertical pole was waiting per Roman custom. Now, this is in Mark 15 and Luke 23. Suffering is always a part of life, so can be shared in the fullness of our love relationship with God. But just like Simon did with Jesus, but just like Jesus, we cannot bear the weight of suffering alone. Even Jesus did not bear the weight of suffering alone. Bearing each other's burdens was central to the faith and practice of the earliest followers of Jesus. And we see that in Galatians 6 and Romans 15. When the majority inexplicably cries out with irrational fears and hatred, singling out one of us for public humiliation and punishment, we who are queer, those who are colonized, those who are enslaved, those who are discriminated against and oppressed in any way, need each other. We follow the example of Simon when we offer to bear what no one among us can bear alone. We follow the example of Jesus too when we accept that help. In Station 3, Jesus falls under the weight of the cross. Jesus' first fall beneath the weight of the cross and his subsequent falls along the road to Calvary are part of the ancient tradition of the worldwide church. In stories, art, and prayer practice, you can see all kinds of artistic depictions of this through the century, even though the Bible itself does not explicitly state that Jesus ever fell on the way to Golgotha, the place of the skull in Hebrew. That is mentioned, John 19 is where it mentions that he's walking to that place, but again, there's no mention of a fall or several falls. For former Pope Benedict XVI, imagining Jesus stumbling on the way to the cross evokes the fallen condition of all humanity and the mystery of Jesus' own sharing in our fall in the same way. That's from 1 John 2 and Philippians 2. The Lord bears this burden and falls over and over again in order to meet us. He gazes on us, he touches our hearts, he falls in order to raise us up. Humanity has fallen and we continue to fall. And that's Benedict XVI, the problematic pope for some of us, a very active opponent of liberation theology. theologies of the marginalized and oppressed. So he interprets that in terms of original sin. Let's look at it another way. One of the Bible's early letters, the letters to the earliest Christians, explains that spiritually we stumble because we don't have the light of love and can't see in the dark without love. This is 1 John chapter 2. It says, if we love others, we are in the light and don't cause problems for them. If we hate others, we are living and walking in the dark, and we don't know where we're going. Those who stumble because they choose to live in the darkness of bigotry and hate clearly cause some of our problems. They trip us because they are lost without the light of love. As we reflect on Jesus' first fall, we can instead remember times when we have stumbled like he did, abandoned by those we once counted on for spiritual guidance and support, fatigued and overwhelmed by what lays before us. At such times, we may wonder whether we have the strength to rise up and walk, as Jesus commanded the man he was healing in Luke 5. Yet Jesus shows us that at such times we can accept help from others and move forward, just like he accepted the help of Simon the Cyrene, even if we do stumble again. And he talks about that, about coming back up from a stumble, accepting help in Matthew 37, Mark 15, and Luke 23. Perhaps stumbling in weary perseverance is not a humiliation to be feared, but a part of the journey to be accepted, as it was even for Jesus himself, perhaps. I have an ant on my screen here visiting me. Station 4. Jesus meets his mother. Okay. In scriptures, Jesus meets his mother at the site of his crucifixion. But as we pray this meditation, we reflect on the ancient story and devotional tradition of their meeting on the road to Golgotha. Mary supports her child Jesus on his path of suffering without focusing on herself and her own grief at this point. Jesus and the disciple whom he loved, John, who reclined on his breast at meals, demonstrates selfless response to loved ones' sufferings even while they're suffering themselves. And this is in John 13 and John 19. Sometimes standing up to persecution, staying in a relationship or identity that's being challenged, we may sometimes feel like a mother who cries out while laboring to give birth to new life, I can't do this. And like her, we may find that we don't really have much choice. We actually are doing what we thought we couldn't. And I think one of the women who prayed with these meditations with me for sharing, actually almost always prayed this with mostly women. And one of them in particular, I remember, she's a clergy person herself, sharing that, and the other women agreeing with her that you cry out, I can't do it, and you're doing it. So I want to credit her for that insight. And like her, we may find that we don't have a choice. We're actually doing what we thought we couldn't do. Sometimes, perhaps like Mary or a mother in labor, we're stretched beyond what we thought was our capacity to endure by that very love itself, which causes so much pain, birthing something new and necessary. It is also the source of our strength, our growth, our courage, our survival of unsupportable grief, and our community. It's kind of a silly way of sorrows tonight. It's the fullness of human experience. So we're praying about letting God walk us through those tough times and really if in a theater of the oppressed way, the kind of grief that we can't fix, but also hearing the joyful play of children. So life is like that. It's all of it at once. They're not mutually exclusive. Station 5. At Station 5, Simon of Cyrene helps Jesus carry the cross. So, like I said, the earliest Gospels suggest that passerby Simon of Cyrene Cyrene would have been told us he was from rural North Africa. He was African. That he was forced by the Roman soldiers to carry the cross for Jesus immediately, and that's in Mark 15 and Luke 23. They had just stripped and scourged him with their short whips, which, according to Roman practice, would have been made of 2 or 3 leather strands connected to a handle, with each leather strand usually attached to multiple pieces of jagged metal or bone that would gouge or even remove the skin, sometimes to the point that muscles were exposed. A flogging was not usually stopped by the centurion in charge until the condemned prisoner was already near death. Understandably, Roman soldiers needed to find someone else to carry that horizontal cross piece for the already dying Jesus. They had flogged him to that point. My friend Reba Herder, who's the founder of Every Light Ministry of Global Cooperation, suggests that guards may have been picked, that they may have picked the rural Simon from the crowd because perhaps he looked the biggest. Maybe he was the strongest. Maybe he seemed to be the most appropriate person for the task. He was a rural foreigner picked by the imperial colonizing, invading forces to do the hard physical labor. So we need to hold that while we think about this. As we meditate on how Simon is forcibly recruited to carry Christ's cross, we can remember that we will not always be the one most suitable to carry the burdens of one we love or wish to help. Or sometimes we're doing something something we didn't volunteer to do. Sometimes caring for others in our community may best be expressed through our willingness to accept not only those moments when we're called to be like Simon, but also to recognize those times when someone else is more suitable to help. Maybe we're not the strongest one for this task right now, even though it's that person we love, like Jesus, that's suffering almost to that point where they're not going to make it. They desperately need help, but maybe we're not the one to help them. So to be able to recognize that is a gift of meditation and a gift of community. Likewise, we learn from Jesus that we do what we can when we're beaten, exposed, and weakened, but we trust God to make up the shortfall. We let other people come alongside us and help. Rarely does this mean that miraculous intervention spares us unjust suffering. That's really the power of this meditation on the way of the cross. This whole time at all 14 stations, we know how this is going to end. Jesus is not going to be rescued from this. The moments of humanity and the moments of divinity in this all 14 stations are about resistance and community. We're not usually gifted with superhuman strength to make our suffering painless. It does not seem like Jesus got through that scourging, flogging, walking to the hill where his cross post was waiting for him, the being nailed, the days of waiting to actually die. He does not seem to have gotten through that without pain. It hurt. So rather, God's help often comes only through the actions of a few other people, like Simon and like the women who comforted and mourned with Jesus along the way. In spite of feeling abandoned by God to such suffering, the help of such people can give us hope, community, and endurance for the painful journey ahead. Station 6, Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. The Gospels don't include this story, but early medieval traditions suggest that a woman, perhaps one of the daughters of Jerusalem that the Gospel of Luke mentions in chapter 23, uses her veil to wipe the bleeding face of the tortured Jesus on his way to being crucified at Calvary or Golgotha. She's known, this anonymous woman, is known in the West as Saint Veronica, which is a combination of Latin and Greek words vera, true, and icon, together meaning true image. Ancient legends suggest she may have been the wife of an influential Roman officer or of a Jewish religious and political leader, and therefore she had to keep her relationship to Jesus a secret. This is where, again, theater of the oppressed comes in. Her brazenly public act of compassion toward him on his path to crucifixion is especially bold and dangerous, an act of coming out. Her approach to Jesus, a prisoner condemned to capital punishment, could only have been permitted by the Roman soldiers because of her husband's rank. And that's why people think, even though this is an apocryphal story, even so, the story itself suggests she must have been a woman married to somebody important enough that she didn't get punished for helping a traitor, a convict walking to death row. Some identify her with Lazarus and Mary's sister Martha from Matthew 15, while others associate her with the woman who had an issue of blood in Matthew 9. Either way, by the 14th century, Veronica's veil, which is also known as the sudarium or sweat cloth, had become such an important holy relic in the church around the world that wherever the Roman church went, the Veronica would go with it, a true icon. This relic is evoked in the 1994 film Forrest Gump, some of you may know, when a man from the crowd offers the exhausted and muddied Forrest a t-shirt to wipe his face while he runs cross-country, and an impression of Forrest's muddied, sweaty face leaves a smiley face imprint on the yellow shirt, and a new icon of American popular culture is born. You may think that's a stretch for me to say that, but there's actually a lot of scholarship on that. That was an iconic moment in film that was hearkening back to this medieval tradition of, I just wish that had been a woman in the film running out from the crowd. Making Veronica a guy. Well, who knows? Okay. Just, what is it called? Gotta dismantle the patriarchy whenever you can. That's what I think. When life's spiritual journey becomes a way of sorrows, we can, like Veronica, be a true image of unconditional love to one another, perhaps in ways that expose our secrets and cost us privilege, like probably did for her. When we wipe the dirt, sweat, and blood from each other's eyes without judging, we restore some of the dignity to another human being with a moment of compassion, even if we can't change the situation itself. Likewise, we can learn from Jesus' example. He didn't actually ask Simon or Veronica to help him. They didn't make the crucifixion go away, and Veronica didn't even help him carry the cross, but she was still helping. Some help may come when we don't ask. In the depth and immensity of our suffering, it may be hard to remember to recognize these small but important gestures as help that restores a bit of dignity to us, even if just for a moment. Yet by recognizing and accepting this kind of help, we're reminded of the many small but important ways we really can help each other. In a community where needs seem so insurmountably great, that we may sometimes feel helpless. And I want to extend that past any specific community and just say, in this time, in this pandemic, during the rise of fascism, when white supremacy is outlandishly violent, as it always is, but more brazenly and publicly and than it's been for a minute, perhaps. So remembering those little things we can do to recognize each other's humanity and see each other is the gift of this Veronica moment. Station 7. Jesus falls again. Both the Gospels of Mark and Luke recount that Jesus, flogged just to the point before death by Roman soldiers, could not carry even the top of the cross himself. Therefore, although the Bible itself does not state explicitly that Jesus falls on his way to the crucifixion, it does seem very likely that Jesus struggled, even stumbled, on the roughly paved, crowded street from the Roman fortress where he was tried and beaten to the site where the vertical post for his cross was waiting. This is a lot easier. Remember that these traditions, these stations were first introduced in Jerusalem itself on the actual road, the Via Crucis, or Crucis, where he walked. So I wouldn't have to describe to you that, look, on this street made of uneven stones, pretty much anybody's going to stumble, let alone if you've been whipped to the point of that you're just about dead. Yeah. So we're having to imagine that, but if we were walking on that street, I doubt we'd have to imagine it. And it wouldn't be such a stretch to say, oh, but if it's not in the Bible, it couldn't have happened, In the Hebrew scriptures that guided Jesus and his Jewish community, Proverbs teach that the righteous may stumble but don't remain in trouble, unlike the unjust whom God judges. So stumbling doesn't get us into trouble is what I'm trying to get here. Being unjust does get us into trouble. A just man falleth 7 times and riseth up again, says Proverbs 24. Christian tradition, that was Jewish tradition. Christian tradition suggests Jesus Christ may have fallen up to 7 times on his way to the cross. It's partly the Christian legend or spiritual practice of meditating on the possibility that Jesus struggled and stumbled as he worked his way to the cross. It draws on this proverb and on this teaching, and in a way sees it as just more evidence that Jesus was a righteous man, because he fell but he kept getting up. In both biblical and theological devotional traditions, stumbling under the weight of suffering does not mean a person lacks faith or is being justly punished by God. When people persecute members, I was going to say members of the LGBT community, but I want to make that broader, especially with everything that's going on right now. When I first wrote that was my focus. But when people persecute others based on religious reasons, whatever it is, whether it's, oh, I'm evangelizing you and it's a mission and I'm saving your soul, so I need to take your land away and send you to a boarding school and separate families, or whatever. It's certainly LGBT people are not the only people that have suffered this. When people persecute others, whoever they are, based on so-called religious reasons, and then ignore or even justify the material, emotional, spiritual, and relational suffering that results, clearly their bigotry. Wait, I'm sorry. Let me just say, when they justify the result of their oppression, okay, so they persecute other people, they cause suffering, and then they say, oh, the fact that you're suffering is God's will. Okay. Sorry, this wasn't written in a clear way. When that happens, we rise up again. In other words, yeah, this is really poorly written. Sorry. So, religious folks sometimes will cause other folks to stumble, is what I was trying to get at in my awkward way, by taking everything away, right? And then they'll say, but since that happened to you, it must be your fault. You must have sinned to cause that to happen to you, not taking responsibility for their own part in that. My point here was that, like Jesus, we rise up again. And like the proverbial just man in Proverbs, we rise up again. Falling and struggling are simply part of our journey to loving God more deeply. Our spiritual journey strives toward perfect love, not perfect action. Prayer reorients us so that God is our life's new center. In spite of the difficulty, even our own falls, we persevere. If Jesus fell, whether just once or repeatedly on his journey to the cross, we remember that with help, he repeatedly got up and continued on this path with help. So that's what we meditate on Station 7. Station 8. The women of Jerusalem weep for Jesus. Just after Simon takes the cross for Jesus in Luke's gospel, Jesus turns to the women in the crowd around him, sharing with them a verse from the prophet Hosea. So here he is, he's been flogged near to death. He can't carry this cross piece. And he actually quotes Hosea in that moment. He quotes a verse from the prophet Hosea that underscores the unjust suffering of the innocent, the painful suffering even of the most faithful. And that's in Hosea. It's from Hosea 10:8. It's echoed again in 1 Peter 4. His message for these women reiterates to them part of his lamentation upon his entry into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, repeating the warnings directed to pregnant and nursing mothers that he preached to his disciples earlier in Luke 19 and 21. He says, "Weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children." And he says that to women disciples, relatives, and bystanders, as recorded in Luke 23. In this moment, he seems to care more about their future suffering than about his own. As we contemplate the uncertainties of the future, we may not find many immediate answers, but we can express compassion for the suffering of others around us, even in the midst of our own. Jesus' words to the women of Jerusalem remind us that even as we do the long-term work to change the world, to make it fit to live in here and now, we can also work right now toward helping fit ourselves and our community to find strength to live in this crisis-filled world as it is. Station 9, Jesus falls for the third time. An artist, Pastor J. Stone, imagines this fall as particularly tragic. The worst of all the falls of Jesus is this one that flattens him to the ground, Stone says. There's no question of any heroic summoning of his human strength. Quite simply, the cross has beaten him. The Son of God is also a human being, and he will not get up from this one unless somebody else lifts him up. In relation to the spiritual life, Teresa of Avila observes that it too can be a continual struggle for some who, like Jesus, may fall many times. However, like him, she says, on no account should you give up. Every journey begins with a single step. Take it. One step will take you nearer to God. And even if you do not progress further, at least you've made a good start and cannot possibly come to harm. We should have the humility to expect moments when, I shouldn't say, I don't like should, sorry. How about this? This meditation invites us to humility. We can have the humility to expect moments when we stumble in our journey toward deeper union with God, being always ready for the hour of conflict. We can never rely on good feelings. Feelings come and go. As Teresa says, just wait till you're put to the test. Doubt your own virtue, or you're sure to have a heavy fall. So again, she's just teaching us these falls, our own falls, Jesus' falls, they invite us to a humility that allows us to stay open to help from other people and from God. Perhaps by meditating on the tradition that even Jesus himself fell many times on the way to Golgotha, our own inevitable falls can be less heavy, tragic, flattening us to the ground, and maybe we'll remember to accept help more readily when it comes. Station 10. Jesus is stripped of his garments. At this point, Jesus' clothes were the last of his material possessions, and tradition suggests that they may have been made for him by his mother Mary. Stripped of these, he could not hide his woundedness, nor himself, behind any protective covering. He was completely vulnerable and exposed in his injury, his pain, his vulnerability. He was vulnerable and exposed to the crowd. Meanwhile, the 4 soldiers who stripped and nailed him divided his meager possessions between them, profiting from Jesus' losses. That's not theater of the oppressed. I don't know what is. To think about that, to reenact that, even just in your mind. How often those of us cast out of workplaces, homes, families, rendered vulnerable as the most private aspects of ourselves and our relationships are revealed, likewise watch those who have a part in our losses dividing and distributing what we once thought was ours. Even undergoing this humiliation, Jesus prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Luke 23. Even Jesus did not say, "I forgive you," or even "I forgive them." We're not asked to forgive the unforgivable. Even Jesus had to pray that God could do what he could not. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Station 11. Jesus is nailed to the cross. Jesus was crucified with 2 robbers, Gospel of Mark tells us, one on his right hand and one on his left. While the socially powerful religious leaders and soldiers, and one of the others being crucified, sneered at him, "Let him save himself if he's God's chosen one." But when the other argued with them that Jesus had done nothing wrong and asked, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom," Jesus promised that condemned criminal, "Truly, I tell you today, you will be with me in paradise." And that's in Luke 23. Though we may be overwhelmed by reflecting on the brutality of unjust suffering, whether Jesus or our own or others, Jesus, a death row prisoner being executed, assures us of God's unconditional presence with us in life or death, in spite of our past mistakes and present failings. As the Good Shepherd seeks his lost sheep, Jesus told us in Luke 15, so God embraces and even exalts those cast out by the noisy, gloating, condemning, righteous majority. The only one to inherit the kingdom and remain with Jesus after death in this story, the profane, the condemned. Station 12, Jesus dies on the cross. Even Jesus experienced the feeling of being abandoned by God on the cross before he died. The two oldest Gospels, Mark and Matthew, agree that Jesus' last words quoted Psalm 22, the only detail of his last words to be repeated in more than one Gospel. In a loud voice he cried, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? It's in Mark 15 and Matthew 27. Earlier, Jesus had told his followers, no one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. It's from John 15. Yet the pain of living a God-forsaken life, abandoned by the people once trusted to share and help guide our spiritual journeys, may seem even more painful than death at times. The disproportionately high rate of suicide in some communities, including the LGBT community, but not limited to that. Highest rate of suicide is among trans people. It's just one statistical indication of this spiritual reality many of us know all too well. To become a martyr, a casualty, or to eliminate oneself as an alleged obstacle in others' lives seems relatively easy compared to enduring daily, unending taunts, isolation, shame, guilt, and perhaps even ongoing social and financial impotence simply for living as oneself. Teresa of Avila reminds us, it isn't your fault if you don't seem able to get close to God. And don't suppose that just because we cannot hear God speaking to us, that God is actually silent. God is never far away. Just try and stay with God in whatever way you can. Just making the language inclusive here. With each other's help, as Simon and Veronica helped Jesus on the path of sorrows from trial to cross, we can continue to live in spite of our own moments of feeling God-forsaken, unsatisfied, and longing for a sense of completion of our never-finished mission in this world. And that mission is love, bearing unconditional love, I believe. Station 13, Jesus is taken down from the cross. Once Jesus was dead, Joseph of Arimathea, a good and righteous man, asked Pilate for the body of Jesus, took it down from the cross, helped prepare it, and offered a tomb for him. This is in John 19 and Luke 23. Traditionally, Joseph is thought to have laid the body of Jesus first in the arms of his mother, Mary, before entombing him. Described earlier as a counselor of honorable estate seeking the kingdom of God in Mark 15, Joseph of Arimathea donated a never-used tomb in his own garden, treating Jesus in effect as if he were a member of his own family. Joseph's acts can remind us of the brokenness not only of Jesus' body, but also the brokenness of the hearts and hopes of his followers, his survivors, his friends and families. Friends and family. Their example of caring together for his body, his broken body, before the resurrection, reminds us how a community gathers in our own times of loss, of hope or faith. So I was really thinking the part that I just changed. Again, I was thinking about the queer community and AIDS, suicide work, things that when we come together. But in these times, I notice, of course, and I know this has been going on for hundreds of years, but of course, the queer community is not the only one that helps one another in their own time. So I just want to really broaden that out and say that, communities of people who are oppressed and dispossessed come together and gather in our own times of loss of hope or faith, focusing on the tasks at hand, sharing what we have, grieving and working together, mutual aid, right? I'm going to put that here. Continuing to live in spite of hate crimes and unjust systems that sometimes bring tragic death and often continue to bring dispossession to many. So the focus in this station is on community gathering. Station 14, Jesus is placed in the tomb. Joseph of Arimathea was joined by several Galilean women, including Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joseph and Nicodemus, to bind Jesus' body in linen cloths with the spices that were typical of Jewish custom at that time. So that was in Mark 15, Luke 23, and John 19 and Mark 15. All the Gospels mention it. Those who gathered around his brutalized, tortured body prepared it with love, even in their grief. Scripture does not record any conversation between Joseph, the two Marys, Nicodemus, and the other women at the tomb. They seemed to work together, yet each one might have been isolated by her or his own grief and shattered hopes in those moments. Their example of shared silent presence while caring for Jesus' body reminds us of the importance of our own active presence with those who hurt, especially when our shared pain is too great for words. In times of loss, we can listen without responding, especially without offering answers. This grief-stricken community can remind us that love takes us out of the isolation of our own pain and struggle, simply by noticing that we are not alone in it, reaching out to share common tasks. Meditating on the way of the cross can help us to move beyond isolation in our suffering toward a kind of transformation. By refusing to think of ourselves as passive victims, casualties, or even martyrs, however good the cause, we move toward new life, resurrection. For some of us, the resurrection process may involve loss of an old identity and relationships, much like a caterpillar disappears after cocooning itself, then appears to be something entirely different when it emerges as a butterfly. Meditating helps us to explore living in the ever-changing tension of accepting that suffering really exists, the stumbling, falling aspects of our spiritual journey, and our hope in the reality of a new life that redeems all suffering, not just our own. You know, if we were praying together these stations in a group, instead of just me here in my room reading to you, we would close with discussion. You would be able to share. I would love to listen to you share whatever touched your heart, or whatever you learned, or whatever you have to offer. And then we'd close in prayer. So if you want to use these meditations with other people or on your own, I have a PDF. This is also, like I said, it's available on Huffington Post. Look for Queering the Stations of the Cross. Just you can Google my last name. I had a different first name, I think, when that was published. I was going by Heath Adam for a while, but if you look Ackley and Queering the Stations of the Cross in Huffington Post, you should be able to find these in writing, or I can send you a PDF if you know me. That has the instructions for the little instructions I've been adding here about, you know, how to pray these, set the stage, sort of thing. All right, that's the end of the guided practice, and thank you for sharing that with me. May all beings be happy. May all beings be safe. May all beings be free. May all beings be well.